drag queen or perhaps you're gay. Is there a point to all these fancy clothes? With all these buckles from your head down to your toes. It's very simple, but I'm just another girl. It's not so easy, but I'm giving it a whirl. Is there something that you're trying to prove? With all the makeup and the way you move, are you looking for some sympathy? No, I'm trying to be the best girl I can be. It's very simple, but I'm just another girl. It's not so easy, but I'm giving it a whirl. Like my martini stride, cosmos I won't deny. Smoke those long cigarettes. Thank God I'm not dead yet. Done all these crazy things, short of a wedding ring. Just
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Callista Solon, and you're watching nlcTrans. Tonight I'm here with my dear friend and co-host, T.a.L.L. Renee couldn't be with us tonight, and I expect we'll see her sort of sporadically because she has some car issues, so she's not been able to make it every week. But anyway, so we actually have some B-roll for you a bit later. We'll get to that probably about half past the hour. Some other things to talk about, and I know, obviously one of them will be, perhaps not at length, but I know you want to talk about the Westboro Baptist Church as it relates to the tragedy in Boston, and certainly our thoughts and prayers go out to the folks in Boston who were injured, and the families, certainly the families of those who were killed. I think the death toll is 3 now, if I'm not mistaken. But apparently a lot of...
including an 8-year-old boy and a 29-year-old girl.
Yeah, an 8-year-old boy. That was, and a 29-year-old girl. Very, very, very sad. I know there were also a lot of really horrific injuries. So I think that the death toll was fairly low, but there were a lot of really horribly injured people in that. So what a horrible thing. But I know that we have a story about that and how it relates to the Westboro Baptist Church. I actually have another story here about the Westboro Baptist Church, which I think you've also got, which is... I
didn't print it.
I did print that one, and I will talk about that if you like, if you're still preparing for the...
Don't dime me out just because I'm off camera.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. But anyway, this was, we occasionally talk about the Westboro Baptist Church, which is a hate group, and not anybody that we're particularly fond of, certainly. They're out there in Topeka, Kansas. But anyway, it was interesting, and we had talked previously about the Rainbow House that is now across the street from the Westboro Baptist Church, which was kind of crazy and amusing, which is anyway, that sort of relates to this.
The property across from the church was purchased and was painted with a giant rainbow flag.
A giant rainbow flag on the house. Yeah, it's very cool. But anyway, this was actually about a former Westboro member who was actually, I believe, a family member.
Well, pretty much the whole church is family members.
Yes, well, yeah.
Children, grandchildren, and married into.
I think you'd sort of have to be involved with them, wouldn't you? But anyway, this was from the Advocate. A former member of the anti-gay Westboro Baptist Church who left the hate group 4 years ago is now taking a stand for LGBT equality in a rainbow house across the street from her former home in Topeka, Kansas. Libby Phelps Alvarez was raised as a member of the hateful WBC, founded by her grandfather, Fred Phelps, when she was 26. Alvarez left the church, but in a new interview with the New York Post, Alvarez discusses her return to Topeka, now supporting Planting Peace, which is the nonprofit that was recently purchased across the street and painted in rainbow colors. Across the street from Westboro's multi-building compound. Alvarez, now 30, told the Post's Sarah Stewart that she hasn't seen her parents since she fled the church, although she still lives in Kansas with her husband. When I was in the Rainbow House last week, I saw my parents go by on their daily walk, Alvarez told the Post. I hadn't seen them in 4 years, and I couldn't go to them, I couldn't talk to them. It wouldn't be productive. I just watched them walk by, and I started crying. Alvarez, who is now partnering with Planting Peace to create anti-bullying programs, says she's certain her parents will see reports about her visit to her hometown. My dad will see this story because he's the one who weeds through press, Alvarez told the Post. And if he thinks it's worth forwarding on, he'll forward it to everybody. And then someone will be like, she's following her lusts. She's going to hell. But I want to tell my parents that I love them, and I want to say that my parents were good parents. Anyway, interesting that the granddaughter, who was sort of, as you say, family, had to be in the church because she was family, has now left and is taken up with the folks across the street. It's sort of poetic justice, I suppose.
Well, I have a bit more poetic justice for you then.
But yes, this story about the WBC is not a fun story at all. But
it is ultimately, because it falls in line with that. But the Westboro Baptist Church released a statement regarding the bombings and the explosions in Boston yesterday, and it's certainly not reflective of any Christian religion I'm aware of.
Yeah.
But this is a anti-gay, anti-Semitic hate group, and that believes that we, as a country, have invited disaster upon us for not following God's law as the law of the land. The Westboro Baptist Church threatens to picket the funerals of those killed by the bombings in Boston, Mass. This isn't really new news because they tend to picket every event, including soldiers' funerals and a bunch of other stuff. They write, the federal government is classifying the bombs as a terrorist attack, but says it's unclear if it's domestic or foreign nature. Here's a hint. God sent the bombs. How many more terrifying ways will you have the Lord injure and kill your fellow countrymen before you insist on nation-dooming, filthy fag marriage? Christ Jesus said that same-sex marriage would prevail just before the time that he returns in power and glory. Massachusetts invited this special wrath from God Almighty when it was the first state to pass same-sex marriage on May 17, 2004. They claim now, as a direct and immediate result of that first step down the slippery slope to nationwide fag marriage, God sent the devastating bombs to the Boston Marathon. So they're threatening to
yeah. And that's the WBC's words.
The WBC's words. I can't take ownership of them.
Yeah.
But they're threatening to picket the and so by the way, because we're going to get into some of this too, we often like to talk about I've forgotten the word now. The first 10 amendments, Bill of Rights.
Bill of Rights.
Bill of Rights issues. And freedom of speech is obviously a big Bill of Rights issue.
Yep.
And the Westboro Baptist Church has been challenged all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they have affirmed that this is protected speech.
And I will defend their right to say whatever they want, but I don't like them. I don't think anybody likes them, but
So, and a lot of people sort of think that, well, maybe there's good cause, and this may affect some of our Second Amendment conversations as well. Maybe there's good cause to not let certain individuals, certain groups have their freedom of speech. And so, of course, you have to get that question of if you start curtailing the rights, where do you draw the line? Who gets to decide, et cetera, et cetera. Keeping that in mind, that nobody likes these people except the 9 or 12
and they
in
are
the group.
Was it the Southern Poverty Law Center?
Yeah.
It's labeled them a hate group.
Oh, well, most people label them a hate group,
but officially, sort of officially a hate group.
Well, they're anti-gay, they're anti-Semitic, they're anti a lot. So there was an there was an article, and this is from the Huffington Post, covering the Westboro Baptist announcement, saying that in this message, the group states that Massachusetts invited the special wrath from God Almighty when it was the first state to pass same-sex marriage. However, the hacktivist group Anonymous made it very clear through Twitter posts that if the Westboro Baptist Church tried anything in Boston, they would feel the full fury of the online community.
Wow.
The WBC has made a name for itself as an ambassador of the offensive. Well, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
There's a certain point where you cross the public decency standard with this stuff. But throughout the past few years, the Kansas-based group has threatened to picket everything, including the funerals of the victims of the Tucson, Arizona shooting, as well as those of American soldiers and the victims of the Sandy Hook massacre.
Yeah.
But in what could be described as the unintended consequence of the WBC hate-mongering, and I'm extending here by proxy the success of the First Amendment, people across the country have come together to fight the group. In the process, the direct result of the WBC, the Westboro Baptist Church protests, is often more tolerance, more acceptance, and a sense of community-wide solidarity. After the group threatened to picket in Newtown, Connecticut, Anonymous launched a full-fledged attack on the WBC, publishing group members' personal information online, overtaking the group's main website, and hacking the Twitter account of one of its representatives.
Wow.
Now, this is not advocating the actions of the hacktivists either.
Right. No.
But free speech will elicit free speech.
Yeah.
Similarly, motorcycles protectively lined up outside the funeral for Newtown victim Principal Dawn Hawksprung, forming a wall of humans and machines. And when Anonymous announced plans to block the WBC from picketing Reddit co-founder Aaron Swartz's funeral, the group backed down at the last minute. When the WBC members showed up to decry the so-called fag agenda at Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York, they were met by more than 500 students and community protesters. The Vassar counter-protest has so far raised more than $100,000 for the Trevor Project. The Trevor Project is an organization that provides crisis intervention and suicide prevention services to LGBT youth.
Yeah. That's cool. That's a good thing. Well, yeah, sure. The silver lining.
Well, and that, have some faith in our founding fathers and the principles they put forward. They put a lot of there's a lot of truths to understand about our founding fathers and the country that was formed in that climate, and what their own motivations might have been. But the concept is that the Union United cannot fail. You protect these rights. You protect the rights and the equality of all people. And in time, in the macro view, things get better, things work out.
Yeah.
In the micro view, it may suck.
Yeah.
And so to that end, we're also on the 50th anniversary of some of the Martin Luther King stuff. In particular, they were talking today about his letter from a Birmingham jail. And one of the speeches that he gave about two Americas and the March on Washington. And so I wanted to point out that it is the 50th anniversary, and there's just one little paragraph from his letter that struck me.
And can you read that?
Barely.
It's very tiny print.
Yeah, well, I'm going to read part of this, and keeping in mind that while he's talking about racial segregation, he's talking about racial discrimination, these concepts remain true.
Sure.
And remain as founding concepts of our country. He says in his letter, "We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was, quote, well-timed, according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now I have heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with a piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. It has been a tranquilizing thalidomide, relieving the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant of frustration. We must come to see that the distinguished jurist of yesterday, that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have waited for more than 340 years for our God-given and constitutional rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed towards the goal of political independence, and we still creep at horse and buggy pace towards the gaining of a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. I guess it's easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers and will drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled police curse, kick, brutalize, and even kill your black brothers and sisters with impunity, when you see the vast majority of your twilight million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to public amusement parks that she has just seen advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her little eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed to colored children, and see the depressing clouds of inferiority begin to form in her mental sky, and see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness towards white people, when you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son asking in agonizing pathos, "Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean?" When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. And it goes on, but I'm not going to go through all the lists. But obviously Martin Luther King Martin Luther King was an amazing man, and I think a great orator, a great writer, and everybody should go read up on some of his stuff because, you know, while he's talking specifically about the segregation and racial issues, and certainly the racial issues that we've experienced in this country go to depths that any of the discrimination we face today can't reach. The concepts behind it are still absolutely true. That equality, I've missed it now. Justice too long delayed is justice denied, that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor, it's demanded by the oppressed. Keeping those kinds of things in mind as we talk about the transgender woman who was cited for using a women's bathroom.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Things, you know, things are getting better, but we're not there yet.
In
was it Idaho?
Lewiston, I've forgotten the name of the town. In Lewiston, Idaho, a transgender woman was cited for trespassing for using the women's bathroom in a grocery store. The police record says that a male subject was using the female restroom, and it had made some women customers uncomfortable because of the appearance of that male in the bathroom. The woman has already undergone one reassignment surgery. And so, well, I don't know specifically which surgery and what's done, but using male restrooms led to feelings of embarrassment and harassment that she sometimes even fears for her safety. And my understanding is she lives as female. This is not somebody who was cross-dressed. This is somebody who is a trans woman. Store employees don't want any further problems, according to the police captain, and the store has the right under Idaho state law to refuse her service. Idaho is not one of the it is one of the 37 states that do not offer protections for transgender Americans.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the name of the person who said the quote here so I can give them credit for it. But Representative Tom McMillian, Republican representative from Michigan, was offering a bill to said of a bill offering protections to transgender Michigan residents that it violates the privacy of women and children. Quote, why would the city want to force places like schools, businesses, and fitness centers to allow men to use a women's restroom or locker room? At the very least, the council should include a requirement for warning signs on women's and girls' public restroom, locker room doors saying that women and girls may be confronted there by men who think they're women. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, the first problem is it's not just the women's and girls' restrooms and locker rooms. It's also the boys' and men's restrooms and locker rooms where trans men would be found.
Right.
And it misses the whole notion, you know, and obviously without anti-discrimination legislation, you can't say anything to the police officer because he used the wrong pronouns. The notion is, I can't do it again. It's not a male subject. The person was a trans woman. Yeah. It's not a man using the bathroom. It's a trans woman using the bathroom. The fact that they have a big skin tag,
yes.
You know, where one shouldn't be.
Yeah, I know. Fortunately, we've
come through it here.
We've made a lot of progress here, and we certainly have protections here, but not everybody does. And
right. Well, 13 states and the District of Columbia, and over time, the number will grow. And you know, there was a time when you weren't allowed to marry outside your religion, and nowadays people rarely ask that question when they go to a wedding if the bride and groom are the same religion.
Yeah.
So
it's progress.
There's a hope.
Yeah. I have something which is a slightly brighter note, which I wanted to read just because I thought this was really cute. So while we have a few minutes left.
And I gotta go find the background comic.
Yeah. I just wanted to quickly read this. This was This is actually about a Facebook post that from a dad of a young child. And I thought this was really cute. But this is posted on Reddit, which I'm not really familiar with, but which is why I guess it got so much publicity. But this was a Facebook post from a dad who sided with his son when the toddler, this was just a little boy, asked for a copy of Disney's animated series about a princess, Sophia the First. I'm not really familiar with that, but there's lots
You're
of these.
You're just not keeping up with things.
Yeah, but one of those cute little princess stories from Disney, I'm sure. But
who has one of the young female actresses voicing? It's a big deal.
Anyway, apparently that's gone viral. This was the father, whose name has been redacted, recounts how he was standing in line at a Walmart with his son when a display advertising Sophia the First caught the child's eye. And I'm going to read the post because this was the actual post, and I thought it was all kind of cute and nice. I was happy to read this. Anyway, the little boy's name was Sam. So here's how Sam became the proud owner of Sophia the First DVD. On Saturday, the kids and I headed to Walmart to get diapers before picking up Aaron at the Fine Arts Center. We are in line, and there is a display of Sophia DVDs next to the line. Sam says, "Oh boy, Sophia the First. I love Sophia the First. Can I get this movie?" And I say, "No, Sam, we have more than enough movies right now," which is very true. Then the following dialogue. And this is the father's description. Moron in Gamecock polo shirt and braided belt. And those are girl movies. You don't want to grow up like a mommy. You want to grow up to be like daddy, me. Actually, I just want him to grow up to be whatever he is supposed to be. And if that's a boy that likes princess movies, then great. Moron. You don't think that will make him funny. Me. I sure hope so. Moron. I don't mean that kind of funny. I mean he might like other boys. Me. And I'd love him just as much, and he'd probably smell better as a teenager. Moron moves to another line. Old lady behind me in line, let me buy that movie for him. You just made my day. And that is how Sam came to own Sophia the First. I thought it was really, I thought it was really cute, and good for the father. It was the father was being very supportive of his young son who just wanted this cute movie, and it's like, yeah, some idiot's got to step in and say that's gonna.
It's going to turn him funny. God, I hope so.
But I love the father. He's just,
yeah.
It was so cute. He handled it very well, I thought.
Well, and you don't know anything about what this kid's going to grow up and express as a sexual orientation or anything. And
who cares? He's a child. He wants the movie.
Well, you know, if you let him watch a movie with a female lead,
oh my God,
like The Wizard of Oz, he might grow up gay.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the greatest movies of all time, and it's one of the few that we've talked about this.
Yeah,
about the situation. In fact,
but for that matter, then basically it boils down to any movie with a strong female lead, with strong female themes.
Oh my God!
Oh my God!
Yeah, it's crazy, but I thought it was a cute story, and kudos to the father.
And it probably doesn't have guns in it, so it can't be masculine,
probably
right?
not. Yeah, it's.
How many women out there are cringing at the thought that guns are a guy thing?
Yeah, it's got a princess and a castle and some birds. Yeah, leave the kid alone.
So the other little bit of fun info, which had hit and sort of passed before today, and I almost forgot about till you mentioned that, is DC Comics has introduced the character of Alyssa in Batgirl, in the Batgirl comics, that hit the shelf this past Wednesday, as a transgender character. She's the first transgender character in a mainstream comic, and she reveals that she is trans during a conversation with Barbara Gordon, who plays Batgirl, or who is Batgirl, in the pages of the new issue.
Yeah. It's very cool.
They talked to the writer, Gail Simone, about why she did it, why did she make the character transgender. And she writes that almost all the tent poles we build our industry upon were created over half a century ago, at a time when the characters were almost without exception white, cisgendered, straight, on and on. It's fine, it's great, people love those characters, but if we only build around them, then we look like an episode of the Andy Griffin Show for all eternity. But
yeah. That was very cool. You were very excited about that. I remember.
It was.
You told me about that.
I was reading along that comic, and I went, "Oh my God, come here! You got to see this."
Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah, there've been like second-tier comics that have had characters like that, and one of the X-Men is gay, and Wolverine's son is bisexual. And, but
diversity. Diversity's good.
And actually, there's I think it's Young Avengers. There's actually a gay male couple, teenagers, two boys that are members of the Young Avengers, and they're fairly popular characters, Hulkling and Wiccan.
Yeah. Cool.
And I think there's a lesbian in the group too. But it's coming along. The stuff that's geared towards the younger audience, and not like the 30 and 40-year-old adults who are reading comics. Are definitely opening doors to be more reflective. But we're getting near the half-past hour. We've got 19 minutes of B-roll that
you should probably introduce.
I should probably introduce. So all I'm going to say about it is that it talks about some of the inequalities in our country, and it's one person's view on what we could do.
Yeah, cool.
Once upon a time, there was a place called Lesterland. Now, Lesterland looks a lot like the United States. Like the United States, it has about 311 million people, and of that 311 million people, it turns out 144,000 are called Lester. If Matt's in the audience, I just borrowed that. I'll return it in a second, this character from your series. So 144,000 are called Lester, which means about 0.05% is named Lester. Now, Lesters and Lesterland have this extraordinary power. There are two elections every election cycle in Lesterland. One is called the general election. The other is called the Lester election. And in the general election, it's the citizens who get to vote, but in the Lester election, it's the Lesters who get to vote. And here's the trick. In order to run in the general election, you must do extremely well in the Lester election. You don't necessarily have to win, but you must do extremely well. Now, what can we say about democracy in Lesterland? Well, we can say, number one, as the Supreme Court said in Citizens United, the people have the ultimate influence over elected officials. Because after all, there is a general election. But only after the Lesters have had their way with the candidates who wish to run in the general election. And number two, obviously, this dependence upon the Lesters is going to produce a subtle, understated, we could say camouflaged bending to keep the Lesters happy. Okay, so we have a democracy, no doubt, but it's dependent upon the Lesters and dependent upon the people. It has a competing dependencies, we could say conflicting dependencies, depending upon who the Lesters are. Okay, that's Lesterland. Now, there are three things I want you to see now that I've described Lesterland. Number one, the United States is Lesterland. The United States is Lesterland. The United States also looks like this, also has two elections. One we call the general election. The second we should call the money election. In the general election, it's the citizens who get to vote if you're over 18. In some states, if you have an ID. In the money election, it's the funders who get to vote. The funders who get to vote. And just like in Lesterland, the trick is to run in the general election, you must do extremely well. In the money election, you don't necessarily have to win. There is Jerry Brown, but you must do extremely well. And here's the key. There are just as few relevant funders in USA land as there are Lesters in Lesterland. Now you say, really? Really? 0.05%? Well, here are the numbers from 2010. 0.26% of America gave $200 or more to any federal candidate. 0.05% gave the maximum amount to any federal candidate. 0.01%, the 1% of the 1%, gave $10,000 or more to federal candidates. And in this election cycle, my favorite statistic is 0.000042%. For those of you doing the numbers, you know that's 132 Americans gave 60% of the super PAC money spent in the cycle we have just seen ending. So I'm just a lawyer. I look at this range of numbers, and I say it's fair for me to say it's 0.05% who are irrelevant funders in America. In this sense, the funders are our Lesters. Now, what can we say about this democracy in USA land? Well, as the Supreme Court said in Citizens United, we could say, of course, the people have the ultimate influence over the elected officials. We have a general election, but only after the funders have had their way with the candidates who wish to run in that general election. And number two, obviously, this dependence upon the funders produces a subtle, understated, camouflaged bending to keep the funders happy. Candidates for Congress and members of Congress spend between 30 and 70% of their time raising money to get back to Congress or to get their party back into power. And the question we need to ask is, what does it do to them, these humans, as they spend their time behind the telephone calling people they've never met, but calling the tiniest slice of the 1%? As anyone would, as they do this, they develop a sixth sense, a constant awareness about how what they do might affect their ability to raise money. They become, in the words of the X-Files, shapeshifters, as they constantly adjust their views in light of what they know will help them to raise money, not on issues 1 to 10, but on issues 11 to 1,000. Leslie Byrne, a Democrat from Virginia, describes that when she went to Congress, she was told by a colleague, quote, always lean to the green. Then to clarify, she went on, he was not an environmentalist. So here, too, we have a democracy dependent upon the funders and dependent upon the people, competing dependencies, possibly conflicting dependencies depending upon who the funders are. Okay, the United States is Lesterland, point number one. Here's point number two. The United States is worse than Lesterland. Worse than Lesterland. Because you can imagine in Lesterland, if we Lesters got a letter from the government that said, hey, you get to pick who gets to run in the general election, we would think maybe of a kind of aristocracy of the Lesters. You know, there are Lesters from every part of social society. There are rich Lesters, poor Lesters, black Lesters, white Lesters. Not many women Lesters, but put that to the side 1 second. We have Lesters from everywhere. We could think, what could we do to make Lesterland better? It's at least possible the Lesters would act for the good of Lesterland. But in our land, in this land, in USA land, there are certainly some sweet Lesters out there, many of them in this room here today, but the vast majority of the Lesters act for the Lesters. Because the shifting coalitions that are comprising the 0.05% are not comprising it for the public interest, it's for their private interest. In this sense, the USA is worse than Lesterland. And finally, point number three. Whatever one wants to say about Lesterland against the background of its history, its traditions, in our land, in USA land, Lesterland is a corruption. A corruption. Now, by corruption, I don't mean brown paper bag, cash secreted among members of Congress. I don't mean Rob Blagojevich sense of corruption. I don't mean any criminal act. The corruption I'm talking about is perfectly legal. It's a corruption relative to the framers' baseline for this republic. The framers gave us what they called a republic. But by a republic, they meant a representative democracy. And by a representative democracy, they meant a government, as Madison put it in Federalist 52, that would have a branch that would be dependent upon the people alone. So here's the model of government. They have the people and the government with this exclusive dependency. But the problem here is that Congress has evolved a different dependence. No longer a dependence upon the people alone, increasingly a dependence upon the funders. Now, this is a dependence too. But it's different and conflicting from a dependence upon the people alone so long as the funders are not the people. This is a corruption. Now, there's good news and bad news about this corruption. One bit of good news is it's bipartisan, equal opportunity corruption. It blocks the left on a whole range of issues that we on the left really care about. It blocks the right, too, as it makes principled arguments of the right increasingly impossible. So, the right wants smaller government. When Al Gore was vice president, his team had an idea for deregulating a significant portion of the telecommunications industry. The chief policy man took this idea to Capitol Hill, and as he reported back to me, the response was, hell no. If we deregulate these guys, how are we going to raise money from them? This is a system that's designed to save the status quo, including the status quo of big and invasive government. It works against the left and the right, and that, you might say, is good news. But here's the bad news. It's a pathological, democracy-destroying corruption. Because in any system where the members are dependent upon the tiniest fraction of us for their election, that means the tiniest number of us, the tiniest number of us can block reform. I know that should have been like a rock or something. I can only find cheese. I'm sorry. So there it is. Block reform. Because there is an economy here, an economy of influence, an economy with lobbyists at the center, which feeds on polarization. It feeds on dysfunction. The worse that it is for us, the better that it is for this fundraising. Henry David Thoreau, there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to one who is striking at the root. This is the root. Okay, now, every single one of you know this. You couldn't be here if you didn't know this, yet you ignore it. You ignore it. This is an impossible problem. You focus on the possible problems, like eradicating polio from the world, or taking an image of every single street across the globe, or building the first real universal translator, or building a fusion factory in your garage. These are the manageable problems, so you ignore So you ignore this corruption, but we cannot ignore this corruption anymore. We need a government that works. And not works for the left or the right, but works for the left and the right, the citizens of the left and right, because there is no sensible reform possible until we end this corruption. So I want you to take hold, to grab the issue you care the most about. Climate change is mine, but it might be financial reform or a simpler tax system or inequality. Grab that issue, sit it down in front of you, look straight in its eyes and tell it there is no Christmas this year. There will never be a Christmas. We will never get your issue solved until we fix this issue first. So it's not that mine is the most important issue. It's not. Yours is the most important issue. But mine is the first issue. The issue we have to solve before we get to fix the issues you care about. No sensible reform, and we cannot afford a world, a future, with no sensible reform. Okay, so how do we do it? Turns out the analytics here are easy, simple. If the problem is members spending an extraordinary amount of time fundraising from the tiniest slice of America, the solution is to have them spend less time fundraising, but fundraise from a wider slice of America, to spread it out, to spread the funder influence so that we restore the idea of dependence upon the people alone. And to do this does not require a constitutional amendment changing the First Amendment. To do this would require a single statute. A statute establishing what we think of as small dollar funded elections, a statute of citizen-funded campaigns. And there are any number of these proposals out there. Fair Elections Now Act, the American Anti-Corruption Act, an idea in my book that I call the Grant and Franklin Project to give vouchers to people to fund elections, an idea of John Sarbanes called the Grassroots Democracy Act. Each of these would fix this corruption by spreading out the influence of funders to all of us. The analytics are easy here. It's the politics that's hard. Indeed, impossibly hard. Because this reform would shrink K Street. Shrink K Street. And Capitol Hill, as Congressman Jim Cooper, a Democrat from Tennessee, put it, has become a farm league for K Street. A farm league for K Street. Members and staffers and bureaucrats have an increasingly common business model in their head, business model focused on their life after government, their life as lobbyists. 50% of the Senate between 1998 and 2004 left to become lobbyists, 42% of the House. Those numbers have only gone up. And as United Republic calculated last April, the average increase in salary for those who they tracked was 1,452%. So it's fair to ask, how is it possible for them to change this? Now, I get this skepticism. I get this cynicism. I get this sense of impossibility. But I don't buy it. This is a solvable issue. If you think about the issues our parents tried to solve in the 20th century, issues like racism, or sexism, or the issue that we've been fighting in this century, homophobia. Those are hard issues. You don't wake up one day no longer a racist. It takes generations to tear that intuition, that DNA out of the soul of a people. But this is a problem of just incentives. Just incentives. Change the incentives and the behavior changes. And the states that have adopted small dollar funded systems have seen overnight a change in the practice. When Connecticut adopted this system, in the very first year, 78% of the elected representatives gave up large contributions and took small contributions only. It's solvable. Not by being a Democrat, not by being a Republican. It's solvable by being citizens, by being citizens, by being citizens. Because if you want to kickstart reform, look, I could kickstart reform at half the price of fixing energy policy. I could give you back a republic. Okay, but even if you're not yet with me, even if you believe this is impossible, what the 5 years since I spoke at TED has taught me as I've spoken about this issue again and again is even if you think it's impossible, that is irrelevant. Irrelevant. I spoke at Dartmouth once, and a woman stood up after I spoke, right in my book, and she said to me, "Professor, you've convinced me. This is hopeless. Hopeless. There's nothing we can do." When she said that, I scrambled. I tried to think, how do I respond to that hopelessness? What is that sense of hopelessness? And what hit me was an image of my 6-year-old son. And I imagined a doctor coming to me and saying, your son has terminal brain cancer, and there's nothing you can do. Nothing you can do. So, would I do nothing? I just sit there, accept that? Okay, nothing I can do. I'm going off to build Google Glass. Of course not. I would do everything I could, and I would do everything I could because this is what love means. That the odds are irrelevant, and that you do whatever the hell you can, the odds be damned. And then I saw the obvious link, because even we liberals love this country. And so when the pundits and the politicians say that change is impossible, what this love of country says back is that's just irrelevant. We lose something dear, something everyone in this room loves and cherishes if we lose this republic. And so we act with everything we can to prove these pundits wrong. So here's my question. Do you have that love? Do you have that love? Because if you do, then what the hell are you? What the hell are we doing? When Ben Franklin was carried from the Constitutional Convention in September of 1787, he was stopped in the street by a woman who said, "Mr. Franklin, what have you wrought?" Franklin said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it. A republic, a representative democracy, a government dependent upon the people alone." We have lost that republic. All of us have to act to get it back. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. I thought that was wonderful. And by the way, I like the block of cheese. I thought it was very nice. And I have a fusion reactor in my garage, doesn't everybody? I'm kidding, of course.
And
but
even we love this country.
Yeah, I thought that was really very wonderful. And thank you for finding that, by the way. Tara is our person that surfs the TED Talks and finds all these wonderful things.
I actually wanted to get the Martin Luther King stuff, but it's mostly audio, and
yeah,
you just have to look at a picture for a while. So.
Which is okay. You know, honestly, I love to listen to him talk. It's just really, it's very inspiring to
MLK
listen.
and JFK.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, the people that can really talk are amazing. You know, it's just anyway. So I digress. But yeah, I love to listen to that stuff. But that was a wonderful talk, and thank you for finding that.
Ties together a lot of the things that we want to talk about today. So
yeah, absolutely, very cool.
I'm done.
Anyway, so we're going to run out of time here fairly soon, but I think, did you want to, and I don't know if you have the information, but I know there's another meeting coming up for the New London Pride, and if you could come up with the date and time. I know that's going to be at the New London Library.
There's also a fundraiser coming up for Alliance for Living.
Ah, yes. We do like the Alliance for Living.
Sinking.
You're working on that. Anyway, while you're looking for that,
Please.
I was just going to go through this very, very quickly. I saw this today, and I thought this was very interesting. This is Hong Kong. Hong Kong's highest court is considering whether a trans woman can marry, which I thought was kind of well, you know, this stuff is going on all over the world, which is kind of cool. The highest court in Hong Kong is scheduled to hear this week what is being held as the city's first case testing the Chinese province's stance on transgender equality. The case revolves around a transgender woman who has undergone gender-affirming surgery and legally changed her gender marker to female. The woman, identified only as W for privacy reasons, wants Hong Kong's court, a court of final appeals, to overturn a lower court ruling declaring that the woman cannot legally marry her boyfriend because she was assigned male at birth. Kind of cool. So we'll see what happens with that. The irony in this was that the government, while the government now refuses to recognize her marriage, a government program provided her with counseling and surgery, and the same government permitted her to change her gender marker. But anyway, so that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. But I thought that was kind of cool.
So the next meeting for the New London Pride, or whatever they end up calling themselves.
Yeah.
They're looking to do a Pride event probably next year on City Pier. Will be tomorrow night, the 17th, 6:15 p.m. in the community room on the lower level of the New London Public Library. There's a note that the doors close at 7, so you have to be there before 7 tomorrow night in the New London Public Library. And there's also a note that they're going to do a gay day at Ocean Beach Sunday, August 11th.
August 11th.
So towards the end of summer, they're going to do a big event down on the Ocean Beach.
Cool.
So if you're interested in getting on a committee and helping make New London Pride, or at least a Pride in New London happen, tomorrow night at the New London Public Library will be the second organizing meeting.
Cool. Very nice. Were you able to find the Alliance for Living?
Not yet.
Certainly, we'll get that to you later at a later date if we have to. But
We've got to look for both the Alliance for Living and True Colors are both doing
right.
Fundraisers.
Yeah. Okay. Because we are actually about to run out of time.
Yep. So we'll say goodnight.
So we will get you more information on that hopefully next week. And in the meantime, thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.